Hey everyone, and welcome back, or if you're new here, hi, I'm Mackenzie, aka Astromac, and I'm a professional astrologer, and I talk all things astrology on this channel. And today we are diving deep into the zodiac sign of Libra, that sign all about balance and relationships and beauty. I think Libra kind of gets misunderstood as this sign that's all about like romance and indecision, but trust me, there is a lot of depth here. And if you've been following my zodiac series, then you know that like each sign is really like a universe in and of itself. And so there's a lot of depth to each sign, including Libra. So if you want to understand Libra energy coming from a Libra sun and Mercury myself, then this is your Libra 101 video. So Libra is the seventh sign in the zodiac, following the practical and discerning and detail-oriented Virgo. And in Libra, it actually marks a shift in the zodiac from the realm of like personal development where, it's like Aries through Virgo. We're going through this phase of, personality development, and the shift into Libra marks a shift into the realm of the other, and specifically in Libra, it's the realm of relationships. And so Libra is the part of the zodiac wheel where we need this feeling of balance and harmony and fairness, and it's where we come to the realization that like we don't exist in a vacuum. And so it reminds us that life is not meant to be lived in isolation, but rather it's about connecting with others and relating with others, and it's about reflection, and it's that dance of mutual give and take within our relationships. And so whether you have Libra placements or not, you still have Libra somewhere in your chart. And so every single one of us has Libra energy somewhere within us. And so Libra as an archetype is the diplomat and the harmonizer and the peacekeeper and the matchmaker, and it's also the artist and the lover and the judge. And it's this energy that tends to act as like a bridge, making these connections. And it's also this energy that acts as a mirror. And so Libra energy is always scanning for harmony and like trying to find what needs more harmony, both, externally in our environment as well as internally, like, finding this harmony between our internal world and the external world, and also, finding harmony within our relationships. It's where we learn lessons regarding cooperation and compromise and collaboration and, working with others to reach a common goal. It's also where we learn to, relate to one another and find common ground and bridge that gap and get everyone together on the same page. And so, like I said, this is a sign that is always looking to bring a greater sense of harmony. And so that goes like externally, like in our environment, creating a beautiful, aesthetically pleasing, harmonious, peaceful environment, as well as like internal harmony and also harmony within all kinds of our relationships. And so Libra is all about harmonizing the internal with the external, that saying like, as above, so below, as within, so without. That is very much a Libra quote, that second part especially. So if you meet a Libra whose life is a mess, you can probably assume that they're going through a bit of like inner turmoil and like vice versa. And I think that need for harmony comes from, Libra being represented by the scales. And so it's like we're trying to find this like perfect sense of harmony and perfect balance. But the thing about balance is that nothing is in a perfect state of balance 24/7. And so it's learning that, balance is not something that is static, but it's a living, breathing rhythm, kind of finding that state of balance throughout our lives. And with harmony, that doesn't mean that everyone is playing the exact same note or the exact same key, but rather we're all playing our own tune that just works well together, and a tune that sounds good together, and like creating a beautiful symphony. And Libra is the orchestrator of that symphony, trying to harmonize everyone and get everyone playing a tune that sounds well together and works well together, creating that sense of harmony. And so after the grounding and refining and analytical Virgo season that is so strongly associated with the harvest, it's kind of like Libra season comes in like a crisp, cool breeze, really encouraging us to go out and make these social connections. Because during Virgo season, we were being invited to turn inward and discern what truly matters to us and really make these deliberate choices and, decide what stays and what goes from our lives, really taking harvest. Now, in Libra season, it's just really encouraging us to, take what we've learned through our Virgo season experiences and take our harvest and share it with someone because, it's special when it's like something that's just for yourself, but there's something even more special when you can share what you know and, share the fruits of your labor with someone else. It's like that saying says, like, shared joy is double joy and shared sorrow is half sorrow. And that just really emphasizes the value of human connection. And that's where we find the energy of Libra is in our human connections and in our relationships. And so if we go back to my plant analogy that, if you've been following me since my Aries 101 video, then you'll remember that, Aries is that seedling that is just sprouting out of the ground and we're just seeing the first signs of life. And then in Taurus, it's that same seedling going back down below the ground, really deepening its roots and really anchoring down and becoming more solid and secure. And then in Gemini, it's that same plant that's back above ground and it's leafing out and exploring its environment and attracting in the pollinators. And then in Cancer, it's that same seedling going back down below and really going inside internally and nurturing itself and nurturing that internal growth. And then in Leo, it's that same plant back up above ground and flowering and blooming, and it's like that sunflower, attracting in the pollinators. And then Virgo is that same plant beginning to perfect itself, producing fruit and seeds. And you could also think of it as that plant getting harvested, like what's useful to us gets harvested and what's not useful to us goes back in the dirt. And now in Libra, this is all about the balance and relationship and, how this plant interacts with its ecosystem, because Libra is all about harmony and this mutual exchange. And so think about how this plant coexists with others and forms these partnerships with other plants within a garden, because Libra is all about learning how to operate cooperatively with others. And so it's learning how to find this state of balance and find this mutual exchange of energy. And sharing is a two-way street, and so the house placement wherever you have Libra is an area of life where you need these close personal relationships and where you need to be able to share your dreams with others and, discover how you can really benefit through this mutual exchange of ideas and knowledge and, experiences as well and wisdom. The key word is mutuality though, where, everyone is on equal ground and no one person's needs are more important than the other. And so in Libra, it's about learning how to maintain your individuality in relation to others. And it's about this awareness of how your actions affect those around you and vice versa. And like when you think about it in terms of plants again, like, think about like how one plant might sacrifice a little bit of room being next to a bigger plant, but then when that plant grows big and tall, it provides that other plant shade from the harsh sun. So it's finding like this mutuality and working together in collaboration and, compromising. And it's about finding like this feeling of a balanced relationship where it feels like there's equal and mutual give and take, and that both plants can coexist and thrive together. That is Libra energy. And it's not always, it kind of sounds like it's like transactional in a way, and sometimes it can manifest that way, especially if there's also like Taurus energy in the mix. But like, I don't know if you've ever met Libra Mars, they can kind of be like tit for tat sometimes, but again, it's just more about this feeling of mutuality where like you give some and then I give some, and it's just like this feeling of equal give and take. And then we both benefit from the equal give and take, And then again, if we are to go back to the very beginning in Aries, Aries is that initiation of life, and it's that fire starter and that lighting of a match. And then in Taurus, that's what sustains that fire and sustains that momentum and, make sure that it lasts and that you don't burn yourself out. And then in Gemini, that's where it introduces this changeability and movement and communication and exchange of ideas. And then in Cancer, that's that nurturing and cultivating those things that we learned through Gemini, and feeling into them and recognizing what it is that we care about. And then in Leo, it's turning those things that we care about into our passions, and provides us with the opportunity to express our Cancer feelings in a creative, self-expressive way. And then Virgo gives us the opportunity to apply our creative urges in a practical manner, and it helps us to discern what truly matters to us and discard the excess in order to feed the things that matter most to us and really create a sense of order. And now in Libra, this is where we seek partnership to create a greater sense of harmony in our lives. And so during Libra season, our focus naturally shifts to our relationships. And it's not just like our romantic relationships, but it's also our friendships and our work relationships and those kinds of collaborations and connections. And it's finding how we relate to others and also how we relate to the world around us. Because Libra's role is to really ensure that our growth as humans is not in isolation. Because I don't know if you're anything like me, where you might go through these phases where you cut yourself off from the world, and you might go through oh, this is me being in my healing girl era or whatever. But then once you go back out into the world and you start interacting with others again, and you kind of realize oh, maybe I'm not as healed as I thought that I was. Because growth and healing really actually happens within our relationships. And that also goes for the relationship that you have with yourself, because remember, Libra tends to act as a mirror. And so if you notice that you have a lot of conflicts with a lot of people in your life, then maybe it's that you're going through your own conflict with yourself internally. And the same goes for our relationships as well, because when you think about it, it's a lot of times in our close personal relationships and those one-on-one connections that we tend to project our shadows the most. And I think that's why Libra energy is so strongly associated with a mirror, because it's in these relationships where we see our shadows, but then we also see the best parts of ourselves that we really admire. If there's something that you really admire about someone, that's somewhere within you as well. And it's also in our relationships where we project and we have these messy conflicts, but then we also have these beautiful resolutions. And that's what life is all about, everything and anything in between. And that's where so much growth and healing happens. At least that's what life is all about for the Libra placements. So if you know someone who has really strong Libra placements, relationships are probably a major theme in their life. But I think for everyone, growth and healing really happens through our relationships with others. And so Libra is the cardinal air sign of the zodiac. So it's the third cardinal sign, the first one being Aries, the second being Cancer, and cardinal signs initiate the start of the next season. And then it's also the second air sign, the first one being Gemini. And so as a cardinal sign, it initiates the start of the fall season in the northern hemisphere. And so the sun's entry into Libra signals the autumnal equinox in the northern hemisphere. And the equinox means that there's equal day and night and equal light and darkness. So during Libra season, it's we get that one day of perfect balance where there's equal day and night. But then after that, as we move through the rest of the fall and winter months, daylight hours start to decrease more and more. So I just think that's kind of funny, because that really just describes Libra energy, where it's we've reached the state of perfect balance, and it's okay, now nothing can change, but slowly things start tipping, and then those scales start to tip, and then we spend the rest of the season trying to find that state of balance again. And that's Libra's goal, it's all about finding that balance and finding peace and finding that state of harmony where the internal reflects the external and vice versa. So I think people might think that Libra is this very balanced, peaceful energy, but in reality, Libras very rarely have super peaceful lives, and oftentimes they find themselves in very high conflict situations. In order to bring a feeling of harmony, where there's a feeling of resolution and there's a solution that benefits most people involved. And so Libra is here to really teach, how to find peace and how to find balance and harmony and how to find solutions that are fair and just for, everyone involved. And, actually Libras probably prefer to deal with other people's conflict rather than their own. But I think it was Alan Oken who said that, like, when a Libra is born into a family, it's because that family system needs a feeling of balance, and like the Libra's presence will bring that. And I can't remember exactly word for word, but it was something like that. So it's almost like, especially for Libra suns, it's almost like we're not able to find our sense of identity in these peaceful situations. Kind of like how we're not able to heal and grow in isolation. It's kind of like we need this feeling of like chaos sometimes and conflict in order to heal and grow and get to know ourselves. Like if a Libra has lived a really easy life where there's been no conflict and like no amount of chaos, there's a lot of untapped gifts and a lot of untapped potential that happens. Because if they're in an environment that is constantly like peaceful and constantly balanced and, everything is perfect and they live in like this perfect little world, then, they're not able to really tap into their deepest gifts of creating balance and creating beauty and creating harmony. Libra needs that contrast. It's like, using the ugliness of the world and turning it into beauty, like that kind of contrast. And so when you live a life where you're not able to really tap into your greatest gifts, it can almost feel like you live a life that feels meaningless. And so Libra is here to create peace and create balance and create harmony and unity. And you can't do that in an environment where it already exists. And same goes for relationships, like a Libra that has cut themselves off from the world and cut themselves off from relationships is a very unhappy Libra, because another one of their gifts lies in making these human-to-human connections. Because so much of Libra's energy is about like seeing ourselves in others and seeing ourselves and getting to know ourselves through this lens of others and coming to understand ourselves in how we relate to others. And remember, it's a cardinal sign, so it's like this initiating energy, and so it's the initiation of human connection and the initiation of relationships. But it's also an air sign, so that means it's a social sign that has to do with the mental realm. And so I think people often forget there's a very like intellectual side of Libra. It's also one of the human signs, even though it is represented by the scales, which, everyone loves to point out that Libra is the only sign that is represented by an inanimate object in the zodiac. But guess what? You need a human in order to operate those scales, so it's very much about like this human interaction occurring in Libra. Otherwise, those scales are just like decoration. So there's a very reasonable side to Libra that has to do with like, the ideas of relating and the ideas of relationship and the ideas of like, what's fair and what's just. And Libra is very much able to take an objective approach to these things. So Libra is a sign that is very much able to see all sides of a situation and like all sides of an argument and all sides of a discussion, and really take everything into account and begin to weigh and measure and try to come to a compromise that, is mutually beneficial for as many people involved as possible. Because Libra is all about reciprocity and bringing people together and unifying people with fairness. And so to someone who maybe doesn't have Libra placements, it might come across that like Libra likes to play devil's advocate, or they're indecisive, or they can't pick a side, or whatever. But what's really going on is that Libra is doing like this mental gymnastics, constantly weighing and measuring everything, trying to come to a state of fairness and balance and equilibrium with all of the information that they're taking in. And so there's a duality that comes with Libra where, it's this energy that is weighing and measuring things in relation to each other. You can't just like weigh one thing on those scales, that'll make those scales tip all the way down on one side. And so you need like a counterbalance to kind of bring things back to this balanced state, whether that be like another person's opinion or, whatever it might be. So with Libra energy, there's that duality again, where there needs to be contrast again, or like a sounding board or something to bounce ideas off of and something to counterbalance again. It can't just happen in isolation on its own. And so there's a need to make sure that like all perspectives on a situation are observed and taken into account and weighed in. And so there's a very observant quality that comes with Libra as well, just like constantly taking in information from their environment. And so a lot of times Libra will act as the mediator in situations, or like the Peacekeeper, or, you know, it's also the Justice card in tarot, and it's associated with like the judge who makes like the final decision on things, you know. But it's with like this constant taking in of information and seeing things from all different perspectives, and, you know, constantly weighing the pros and cons of situations. You know, I think this is where Libra gets that reputation for being super indecisive, and it's like we can kind of burn ourselves out a little bit with all this constant weighing and measuring of every little thing. And so this can sometimes lead to this feeling of like analysis paralysis. And so it's very different to like Aries, you know, where Aries just kind of, it approaches things head on, and it's just very straightforward, and, you know, they just take the action and they just make a decision. But, you know, with Libra, it's kind of like they view things through a different lens, through like a lens that's like a kaleidoscope almost, or like, you know, it's like a Rubik's Cube where there's so many different perspectives to take in. And, you know, if they kind of like do this thing, then this happens. And if they move this way, then this will happen, you know? Especially if other people are involved in like the decision-making process. Like, you know, not only are like the Libras thinking about what will happen to them, but they're thinking about everyone else involved in the situation. And so it's like that brings in even more perspectives and more complications because Libra doesn't want to upset anyone, and they want to make sure that everyone is having an enjoyable experience and having a good time. And, you know, they don't want to rock the boat or like leave anyone out, or, you know, whatever it might be. And so it's almost like this inner turmoil that Libra goes through when having to make a decision, because it's kind of like chess. Like if I make this move, or if I choose option A, then like all of these things will happen. Or if I choose option B and I move this way, then all of these things will happen. And so it's kind of like weighing and measuring the pros and cons of all potential situations. Like Libra is very aware of the cause and effect of every potential decision. And so they might find that it's easier to kind of like sit on the fence, or, you know, sit in the middle rather than making a definitive decision. So this is what leads to like that notorious Libra indecision. But, you know, it's also the notorious Libra people pleasing as well, where they just want to, you know, make a decision or come up with a solution that makes, you know, all parties happy, sometimes at the expense of their own happiness, sometimes putting other people's needs and wants and desires above their own. And so, you know, they're good at anticipating and knowing what other people might want and what they might need and what they might be feeling. And so sometimes they don't always know like what they want and need and feel in situations. And this is just because Libra is so like attuned to the other and attuned to what the other person might need and want, and, you know, trying to create harmony. And so they might lose themselves in the ideas and opinions of other people. And so Libra is one of those signs that I think needs to spend a fair amount of time alone, you know, getting to know themselves and, you know, getting to know what they truly want and desire, and, you know, not just like constantly trying to people please. Although Libra is a sign that really thrives in relationships, but, you know, also, you know, finding that balance and spending some time alone as well. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think, you know, in an ideal Libra world, it would be, you know, trying to come up with a solution that is like a win-win situation, you know? Because at its core, I think Libra just really doesn't like conflict, and they don't like when people are upset with them. And so Libra placements will often find themselves in the middle of messy situations because they're kind of like, you know, why can't we all just get along, you know? So Libra can be pretty conflict avoidant sometimes, you know, not wanting to deal with like the messy side of relationships, preferring to like keep the peace at the expense of their own peace sometimes. And so part of their life journey is learning that like instead of avoidance or sweeping conflict under the rug, like, you know, true harmony doesn't come from avoiding that discomfort, but it requires honesty and accountability and moving through that discomfort in order to find true peace and true balance and true resolution, you know, not just like this superficial appearance of harmony, you know. But like, you know, going back to that weighing and measuring, you can know for certain that when Libra has made a decision or come to a conclusion about something, they have weighed and measured every possible scenario, and so they are sure on their decision after that. And so that's why Libra is the judge. And you can be sure that they've come to this conclusion trying to be fair to everyone, because they just have such a passion for, you know, justice and fairness and equality. And so that's why Libra is so often associated with social justice. And so that can be something that they like really struggle with when they meet someone who like treats them unfairly, or someone who is like rude to them for no reason. or even like seeing injustices in the world. Libra placements are very sensitive to the injustices in the world, and it can really like affect them in a very visceral way. So they make good social justice warriors and good advocates who can like stand up for people who maybe can't in certain situations, and fight for what they see is right. But like I said, it's an air sign and it's also a human sign, and so it's all about like social connections. And even looking at its glyph, like to me, I imagine it's like this bridge, bridging this human to human connection. And then that makes me think of Libra being ruled by Venus. And, Venus is that planet that's all about relating and connecting and how we connect with others. And in Libra, it's where we come to understand ourselves and how we relate to others and come to understand ourselves through our relationships. Something that Libra has to be careful about, though, is like that codependence where we get so like, dependent on others to really validate who we are, that we don't know who we are without the other. And so something to be careful of when we've got Libra placements. And so like I said earlier, I think it's pretty healthy to kind of, if you notice that you don't really know who you are without someone else, that's when it's pretty healthy to spend some time alone and really, counterbalance it with the sister sign being Aries, and spend some time alone just getting to know who you are and getting to know your own wants and your own needs and your own likes and dislikes, all that fun stuff. But healthy Libra expression is, being like your own self within relationships and, getting to know yourself deeper through how you relate to others and make these human to human connections. Because Libra energy is all about like relating and this sense of togetherness. And, I always think of like hands holding with Libra energy. So because Libra is all about coming to like understand ourselves and see ourselves through the lens of others, it's kind of like we're really good at, understanding other people's perspective. And Libra is good at, meeting people where they are and, creating this initial feeling of harmony. And so Libra can kind of be friends with anybody. That doesn't necessarily mean like close friends, but I bet everyone watching this video probably knows a Libra, because Libra is kind of like, an acquaintance to all. It's all about, a friend of a friend, kind of like that's the Libra energy. It's like this master of relating and, making these human connections. And so they approach relationships almost like an art, where they have like this grace and this charm and this charisma and just this drive to connect with others. Again, think about the glyph and how it looks like a bridge. It's like, making these connections really. And they do this with like an effortless grace and like a certain level of diplomacy. They've got good social etiquette and good manners, and they're courteous and polite, and they know what's expected socially. And so they're kind of able to, meet those expectations and, read the room really. Libras kind of act as like a social lubricant, where they just kind of make like these social interactions feel a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more balanced and a little bit more fair and, just a little bit better for all. And being a human sign, Libra just has like this natural ability to read people as well. And, like a well-developed Libra probably is able to understand you better than you even understand yourself sometimes, because they just have like this human intuition and like understanding and empathy in that way. And so they're able to read people and read their motives and read their mood really. They're good at reading the energy of the room and picking up on social cues. They're kind of like the natural vibe checker of the room. And so like if the vibes are off, they'll kind of do anything in their power to restore a feeling of harmony and peace in the environment. Just making sure that everyone's having a good time and, everyone's playing fair and everyone's, has good decorum and, making sure that nobody's getting left out and that everyone's getting included, just constantly trying to fix the vibe. But sometimes it can almost express in a way where it's like they're trying so hard to fix the vibes that they can almost become like a chameleon, where, they may not truly mean what they say, but they can sense that, the person that's in front of them, like that's what they want to hear. And I've found that, Libra really cares what other people think and feel about them, being so attuned to the other. And so it's almost like they really want to be in control of how they're being perceived. And so there's almost this stereotype of how Libra can be like superficial or fake, but, really it's a survival mechanism that Libra had to adapt early on. But like I've been saying, Libra comes to understand itself through the lens of others and through these relationships. And so when someone doesn't like Libra, it can be like, oh fuck, what am I doing that they don't like? What about me do they not like? And do I not like myself? If someone doesn't like me, do I not like myself? They can really go down that like thought spiral. And it can really set off like this cascade where it's like if they're not strong in knowing who they are and solid in themselves, then like another person's opinion on them can really like sway their sense of self almost. And so part of Libra's journey is learning to develop a really deep relationship with the self and, going within and, doing a lot of self-reflection and getting to know ourselves and figuring out what we like and what we don't like and really becoming more secure and just sure of ourselves and more solid. So there is a lot of depth to Libra when, we've done the work on ourselves. And so that's also part of like healing the Libra people pleasing is when we become more sure of ourselves and more solid on our own. That's when we're not like constantly trying to adjust ourselves and trying to please the other person in front of us, and rather we're, setting the tone of the room instead. Because like I've been saying, Libra has that social intuition and, they're very curious about other people and trying to understand someone and understand their life experience and just trying to see things through another person's eyes because, when they can do that, it really helps them to understand their own life experience and how they relate to that, whether they relate to it on some level or, they don't relate to it at all. You still learn something about yourself through that. And so I think there's an empathy that comes with Libra as well, but because it's an air sign, they're able to, detach emotionally and just see things more objectively, but, they're still able to empathize and understand the people in their life. And so I think that's why Libra has this tendency to almost pedestalize people because, we see the potential and, we see what we want to see and we try to see the good qualities and try to bring those out of people. But, sometimes people take advantage of that. But I think Libra is also able to meet people where they are and, harmonize in that way. And so they're able to be very non-judgmental as well because it's kind of like, we're able to see a little bit of ourselves in every single human. It's that mirror energy again. And so it's this understanding that like, if I'm judging you, that means I'm also judging myself, And so it's in Libra that we come to this awareness. But I think because Libra is like polite and kind and has tact and, just like those good social graces, they just tend to be nice and kind people. And so I think, people might take that as a sign of weakness, but Libra is not weak energy at all. They actually have this incredible ability to withstand a tremendous amount. But I think because they make it look easy, people might kind of underestimate Libra. But, Libra is an incredibly strategic sign. And so, maybe they kind of like you to underestimate them a little bit. And with that people smarts again, they probably understand you better than you understand yourself. So they might sometimes play a little bit of a mental game because Libra is intelligent and so they're pretty witty and they can be cunning and again, just very strategic and in how they play their cards. And so I think sometimes this is where Libra might get that reputation for like being manipulative, but every single sign is manipulative and every person can be manipulative in how they get their needs met, And so a lot of people like to point the finger at Libra, but guess what? Libra is a mirror, so Libra is also ruled by Venus and it's the second sign that we've met that is ruled by Venus, the first one being Taurus. And in Taurus, this Venus rulership shows up as like this like earthly sensual pleasures of life. And being an earth sign, it's like more tangible. And so I always think of like the Empress in tarot when I think of Venus's rulership in Taurus, where it's about like nature and gardening and like ease and comfort and like good food, soft blankets, and like those earthly pleasures of life. And then in contrast, Venus's rulership in Libra is more about like the art of connecting and the art of relating and, connecting within our relationships. And so it's like that relationship aspect of Venus. And it's also about like the beauty side of Venus as well and like creating harmony through beauty and aesthetics. It's kind of like the intellectual side of Venus where it's like trying to understand beauty as like a concept or like in a philosophical sense, like the complexity of beauty and grace and the complexity of like human nature and the human mind and of human relationships and like finding the beauty in our relationships as well. But Libra is that sign that like especially needs beauty in their physical space, because it's like the external reflects the internal and vice versa, you know? And so it's like they need to be surrounded by beauty in order to feel safe and secure. And it's just like a nice way for them to be able to express themselves as well. And you know, Libra is really good at like creating and curating things that look good, because they have an eye for art and an eye for beauty, and you know, like an eye for like symmetry. You know, I think it's like that harmonizing quality and just creating like an environment that feels good and looks good. And I think that's one of the ways that Libra learns to cope with the world, is through creating beauty in the world. Because life on this planet as humans can feel pretty harsh sometimes, and it can be pretty ugly. And so it's like Libra learns to contrast that with, you know, creating beauty and creating a feeling of peace and harmony. And I think Libras are also incredibly like creative thinkers as well, because it's like where intellect meets intuition and thinking meets feeling, you know, being an air sign and ruled by Venus. And so they're like creative problem solvers as well, really understanding the needs and the aspects of like the whole equation. Because a Libra's mind is constantly working like overtime, and so they need to be able to create a solution and a strategy that will benefit all people. Because again, they're great compromisers, and they understand the art of relationship and, you know, the art of compromise. And so they do that through bridging the gap again, and you need to be creative in how you do this. And so much like how the world would probably fall apart without Virgo, the world would be a very unfair, unjust, discordant, and ugly place without Libra. And so I know this has been a lot to take in, so let's briefly bring it back to basics and try to sum it all up. And so Libra is the cardinal air sign of the zodiac. And so as an air sign, it operates through the ideas and through communication and human connection, and they think about relationships rather than like, you know, purely just feeling them. And as a cardinal sign, you know, they're the initiators, and so they initiate these relationships and they initiate these connections and these bonds. And so it's like they start conversations and they introduce people and they kickstart other partnerships and relationships for people. And so this combination means they kind of bring these like fresh ideas and these new ideas into social spaces. And so it's like they initiate conversations and they initiate new ideas, and you know, they set trends in style and taste, and they help to move energy through the collective. Again, I just think of like this bridge and mirror energy when I think about Libra, where they bridge social connections and they bridge conflicts, trying to find peace and, you know, meet somewhere in the middle. And when I think about that bridge again, I think about this ability to bring people together. And so they make good mediators and good peacekeepers. And they also make good matchmakers, you know, they bring people together. And that brings me to Libra's rulership, being ruled by Venus. And, you know, Venus is that planet all about how we relate to each other and how we connect with each other. And so it's a very relational sign. And it's a sign that is naturally attuned to beauty. And so it gives Libra like this natural aesthetic sense where they just know what looks good. And so they have that eye for beauty and an eye for design, and they just have like good social graces as well. And Libra in the zodiac is represented by the scales, and you know, that can be the scales of justice, but it's also the scales of commerce. I kind of view the Libra scales as weighing like our thoughts and our feelings, and also like, you know, our brain and our heart, what we know versus what we feel. And so it's like, you know, our mind versus intuition, and trying to find that balance somewhere in between. And you know, like I said, Libra is about finding the balance. And so that doesn't mean a Libra is a very balanced person, but like when things get unbalanced, sometimes it can almost be like a pendulum. And so we might sometimes swing from extremes, but it's about coming back to this like neutral state and about finding that feeling of balance and harmony again. Really striving for, you know, recalibration and equilibrium. And then looking at its glyph, you know, it's a simple line and then a half circle above it that represents the scales, symbolizing Libra's connection to balance, fairness, and equality and harmony. And to me, I kind of view it as a sunset, and, you know, with its connection to the 7th house, like when the sun is going through that 7th house, that is, the time of sunset. And, sunset is beautiful. And so that makes me think of Libra as well. And to me, this glyph also kind of looks like a bridge, and like we've been talking about this whole video, Libra is that bridge between human connections. It's like, bridging the gap and bringing people together. Instead of having to take like the long way all the way around, Libra is that bridge that connects people. Now let's talk about the strengths and potential challenges that Libra energy faces. And so at its best, Libra is incredibly attuned to this sense of fairness and justice. They just naturally see all sides of a situation, and so they have a real passion for justice and fairness and equality. And so again, injustices in the world can really be difficult for those Libra placements, and so it can be really almost depleting in a way. Libras are also like masters in aesthetics, whether that's fashion or beauty and makeup or interior design or architectural design, or even in just like curating a vibe. Libra energy just knows what looks good and what feels good, and just trying to make things more pleasant for everyone involved. They're also good social connectors, and they have great social intuition as well. And so, these are the people who will introduce you to like your future best friend or your future spouse, or like they know someone who knows someone who like you guys will just like really hit it off and get along. And so they're good at, again, bringing people together. They've also got, again, that good like social intuition. And so they're good at understanding other people and really empathizing with all kinds of people, because they recognize themselves in everyone in some kind of way, whether they relate to them or they don't. And so with that, they've also got the good social skills where they're good at like reading the vibe of the room and picking up on social cues, and then trying to fix the vibe in the room. And they're also very like charming and charismatic, and they're really good at like making other people feel good about themselves, because they see the best in someone and they want to bring that out of them and then like mirror it back to them, because again, Libra acts as a mirror. They're also very like diplomatic problem solvers. They are able to soothe over conflicts and smooth over some of those rough edges and calm things down and really find a middle ground and find a resolution that benefits most people, because they're all for fairness and justice again. Now, like every sign, Libra has its shadows and some of its challenges that it deals with when it's feeling under-resourced, and so I think I've touched on a few of them already, but like one of them is that notorious indecision, not because they like can't choose, but because they genuinely see the value in all kinds of situations, and they see potential outcomes in all kinds of situations. So it can be hard for them to decide when they're, balancing all of these things in their mind. And another thing is, at its worst, Libra doesn't always know who they are, without the other. And so that's where that codependence can sometimes kick in. So leaning into like the Aries side of things where, they need to spend some time alone and get to know themselves outside of relationships and, get to know their own wants and needs and desires and likes and dislikes. Because when you know who you are and you know what you like and what you don't like, that helps make it easier to make decisions. But also another thing that Libra can sometimes struggle with is the people pleasing, putting other people's wants and needs and desires above your own. And so in Libra's quest for trying to find harmony and find peace, they can sometimes abandon their own truth and abandon their own needs. And so finding that right balance and like that sweet spot and that compromise where, both people end up happy. Another thing Libra might struggle with sometimes are like these surface level tendencies, but that's more of the under-resourced side of Libra, where they haven't taken time to deal with the messy, not so fun kind of ugly emotions of life. And sometimes this obsession with beauty can sometimes drift into vanity. Another thing, like I said, Libra doesn't like to deal with the uncomfortable emotions in life sometimes. Unless you've got other things going on in your chart, but sometimes they might avoid having to have those uncomfortable conversations, and so they might kind of do everything in their power to avoid, rocking the boat or, creating any kind of conflict. And so that can come across as like avoidance and sweeping things under the rug, or even like passive aggression, because they don't like conflict, and so they can be pretty conflict avoidant in trying to maintain this, you know, false sense of harmony, really. And so really, like I said earlier, it's moving through those difficult emotions and having those hard conversations and, you know, getting honest and taking accountability that true harmony happens, you know, and you've got to have those difficult conversations sometimes. And so the key lessons for Libra is to learn to find like this sweet spot and to find this balance between self and other, and, you know, not losing themselves in relationships, but rather finding this way to maintain your sense of self and your own autonomy within relationships, and learning to understand yourself more through these relationships in how you connect with others and in how you relate to others. And also in learning to harmonize the internal with the external, and learning that true harmony comes from within and not just in how you control or arrange your external world, you know, everything outside of you to look perfect. And so that is Libra, you know, it's a lot to take in, but it is that sign of balance and justice and fairness and harmony and beauty and aesthetics and relationships. And it's that art of connection and, you know, making those human to human connections, because again, life is not meant to be lived in isolation, but it's meant to be lived with others. And it's also that deep inner work around, you know, making decisions and coming to know yourself through these relationships and through others, and, you know, coming to a deep sense of selfhood. And Libra teaches us that balance isn't something that we achieve once and that we keep forever, but it's a dance and a constant recalibration. And in that dance, we find grace and meaning in life. So I think that's all I've got to say about Libra. I'm sorry I kept going on and on and on. I just have a lot of life experience being a Libra, so I guess I had a lot to say. But if you liked what I had to say, be sure to leave a like and a follow, and even comment like if you have any Libra placements, and share this video with your Libra friends, because that would really help me out. And so if you've made it this far, thank you so much, and thank you for watching, and thank you for being here, and until next time, love you, bye!